Hey, what's up, y'all? It has been way too long since I've made a video. Between the new school semester and working a job, I haven't really had the time nor the energy to make any new content. But after a couple months, I feel like I'm back in the swing of things, and I feel ready to take on a brand new slate of movies for this month. Since Halloween is right around the corner, I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to review some of my favorite movies that I like to put on around this time of year. And I thought I'd do something a bit different because I'm going to avoid straight up horror flicks because let's be real, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so chances are you're going to be watching all these movies with your family, so you want to make sure that there's something everyone can enjoy. So what I'm going to do for this list is I'm going to start from the most kid-friendly thing possible to the most R-rated thing possible at the very end. First up is a double feature of sorts. Walt Disney's The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr Toad. The film is a retelling of two different American and British literature classics. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Despite the film's title, it actually begins retelling the story of Mr. Toad, and then finishes with the story of Ichabod Crane. The Mr. Toad section of the film follows the titular character as he finds himself chasing every fad that blows his way. This impulsive behavior, however, comes back to bite him as his latest craze, motor mania, gets him falsely accused of stealing an automobile. What I like most about this section, as well as the next, is that neither of them feel like your typical Disney animation. Heck, the design and borderline rude attitude of Mr. Toad feels more like he belongs in Looney Tunes universe rather than a Disney film. He legit lives to mess with people, and that zaniness is not something you often see in a Disney film. In a way, it's a pretty smart move having the film start off with Mr. Toad. It gets the viewer settled in and cozy before the real terror begins. Ichabod Crane is the story of a schoolmaster who, while not a bad guy, isn't exactly a man of well repute either. He's nice to very specific students if he knows their mothers are good cooks, and it's heavily implied that he sleeps with most of these women as well. Much like Mr. Toad, Ichabod's behavior gets him into some trouble along the way, with being extremely superstitious. After he and a rival of his fight over a girl they're both chasing after, his rival, who I'm pretty sure is the inspiration of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, tells Crane a story about the Headless Horseman, which drives Crane into terror-filled paranoia. On his walk back home through the woods, this story makes Crane jump at every last bump in the night. At first, he believes he's just being paranoid, that is, until the actual Headless Horseman appears before him and begins chasing him through the woods with a sword in one hand and a jack-o'-lantern in the other. And to be honest, for a G-rated kids film from over 70 years ago, the image is pretty dang terrifying. And it's so weird knowing that this is G-rated, and yet something like Inside Out gets a PG rating. The film ends on an ambiguous note where some of the townsfolk believe Crane left town with a beautiful woman by his side, while others believe a more eerie tale that involves Crane being taken away into the afterlife by the hand of the Headless Horseman, which, you know, it's the second one. While not your typical film, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad is a classic in its own right because it provides a healthy amount of cartoonish physical comedy that ends with a hearty dose of Halloween terror, complete with a seasonal staple of a jack-o'-lantern. It's hard to call this a film since it's technically two animated shorts mashed together, but at the end of the day, it's still worth a watch. And I'm going to give The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad a B+. Next up is Addams Family and Addams Family Values. If for some reason you're unaware of this franchise, the Addams Family is a fictional household that originated as a comic strip back in 1938. Since then, it's been adapted into a sitcom, a cartoon, 2 live-action films, and most recently an animated feature by Illumination Studios with a sequel on the way. For our purposes, however, we're just going to talk about the 2 live-action films from the 1990s. The first one, simply titled The Addams Family, was released in 1991, directed by Men in Black's Barry Sonnenfeld, and stars Angelica Houston, Raul Julia, and Christopher Lloyd as Uncle Fester. The story follows 2 con artists who try to swindle the Addams out of their wealth, but are constantly foiled by the eccentric family's strange shenanigans. And if being perfectly honest, the story itself is probably the weakest part of the movie, in that it's a tad confusing. You see the con artists get the idea of swindling this family's inheritance because one of them looks an awful lot like the family's long-lost Uncle Fester, who is said to have been lost in the Bermuda Triangle, who is then later revealed to be the real Uncle Fester, who just has amnesia. this wouldn't be so bad, except they build it up as though it's this big M. Night Shyamalan reveal, but let's be honest, could you possibly, in your right mind, not figure out that it's Uncle Fester in a matter of 2 seconds? I mean, just look at the guy. But the thing is, you don't really watch The Addams Family for the story. You watch it for some really dark slapstick humor. And it provides exactly that. First off, I just want to say how much I admire the balls on this movie for going PG-13. Because of this, they're able to go a lot darker and venture more into the macabre, dark side of humor. When you first meet Wednesday Addams, she's getting ready to shoot an apple out of her brother's mouth, which is obviously very dangerous, and you can't help but get the idea that she kind of wants her brother dead. The parents are also hilarious. My favorite thing is when Gomez and Morticia talk about some of the darkest subject matter, but it's like the more horrible, the deeper in love they fall in love with each other. I know it's kind of an easy running gag like, oh, haha, they like horrible things. But for this, it seems to work. I also love when the family interacts with the rest of the town, and they just have to put up with their nonsense because they're too polite to let on that they're being annoying. It's kind of like how Squidward is so endearing because he reacts just as you would react if you had to deal with these crazy people. And then there's a slapstick humor. And I'm a bit torn because on one hand, it feels more like a cartoon than a live-action feature, but I think it works here because, one, it's based on a comic strip, and I think if they portrayed some of the darker elements too realistically, it would come off as less humorous and more disturbing. This film is so strange, but I think it's the perfect film to watch with your family. It's not too grown up that it's going to disturb your kids, but it's also not too childish that adults can't get a good laugh. It really does have something for everyone. Well, the story is a bit lackluster. That's not really the whole point of the movie. The point is watching a crazy and eccentric family who clearly love each other. They're just a bit out there. If you got kids and want to show them something that pushes the envelope without going too overboard, The Addams Family might just be for you. And I'm going to give Addams Family a C. Now let's take a look at its sequel, Addams Family Values. And I don't know if I'm in the minority on this, but I actually think that The Addams Family Values holds up a bit more. It follows similar beats as the first one. A con artist, played by Joan Cusack, convinces Uncle Fester to marry her. Unbeknownst to Fester, however, she is actually a serial killer who intends to murder him and make it look like an accident so she can inherit it, once again, the Addams Family wealth. While I think it falls into the trap of copy and pasting what the first movie did, this one stands out by having a different message than the first. The first movie has this message that it's okay to be different, and, that's fine. Addams Family Values, however, teaches that just because you're nice doesn't mean that you're a good person. And just because you break a lot of social norms doesn't necessarily mean you're bad. And I think the best example is when Wednesday and her brother Pugsley get sent to this camp, and all the campers and counselors are, quote, nice people, but that doesn't mean they're good. I particularly like the scene where they put on a play centered around the first Thanksgiving meal, and they put a lot of emphasis on the nice aspects of Thanksgiving, like eating turkey, and they perpetuate the idea that the Pilgrims were super nice to the Indians and all that sappy stuff that we were all taught growing up. And then Wednesday comes in and purposely sabotaged the play by basically telling the audience what really went down when the Pilgrims came to America. It's morbid, but it's real. Well, the first one is fun to watch because this crazy family tormenting everyone around them. This, to me, has a bit more bite behind it because it has this message that it's better to be real than to be nice. And I'm going to give Addams Family Values a B-. Another good film to watch while you're stuck at home is the Mummy remake. And no, not the Tom Cruise remake that was supposed to kick off this Universal Monster Cinematic Universe. I'm talking about the one with Brendan Fraser. Is the movie super cheesy? Yeah. The CGI is awful, even for that era. The dialogue is like nothing anyone would ever say in real life. And the story is fairly simple in that Brendan Fraser and his friends have to stop a mummy from becoming too powerful before he takes over the world. But I also feel like that's part of the charm. Halloween is a generally cheesy holiday, so I feel like the over-the-top nature of this film really adds to the fun of it. Plus, I think this film offers something for everyone. There's just enough spooky elements to keep adults interested, and it's just silly enough to keep the kids entertained without scarring them for life. Plus, Brendan Fraser is a national treasure, and I wish he'd return to acting at some point in the near future. And I'm going to give The Mummy a B. Now it's time to get very adult. and talk about one of Edgar Wright's best movies ever put to film, Shaun of the Dead. Now, to be honest, I actually debated putting this one on the list because, while it's technically a comedy, it's still pretty scary. If you've never seen this movie, the film is about a guy named Shaun who drifts through life pretty aimlessly, much like a zombie, to the point where when a zombie apocalypse does happen, he doesn't even notice because everyone was just walking around aimlessly anyways. So to cope and make sure his friends and family stay safe, they take refuge in a local bar and wait for the whole thing to blow over. I think the reason I did end up including this one, despite having some really scary imagery, is a lot of the comedy undercuts the tension, making it more amusing than anything else. One of my favorite scenes is when Shaun and his buddy, played by Nick Frost, try to kill some zombies by throwing old records at them. The whole scene is so childish, and that's what makes it funny. The film's message is really about changing the circumstances in your life that you can change, like mending strained friendships, while laughing at the things you can't change, like a zombie apocalypse. And I think right now, we're all watching Halloween movies rather than going to Halloween parties because of a pandemic, and this film kind of hits close to home in that regard. You know, there's something around us that we can't change, so we may as well find the humor in the situation to the best of our ability. But if you've seen any of Edgar Wright's other work like Baby Driver and Scott Pilgrim, you already know that. And I'm going to give Shaun of the Dead an A. And that's all the films that I would recommend to you to watch for Halloween this year. If you have any other personal favorites, let me know in those comments below. But anyways, thank you guys for listening. I'm Higgs. This has been my flick. Peace.